Whether we are talking about NeoVim plus Kitty, whether we are talking about Emacs, whether we are talking about Emacs and all the possible ways you can do things, there isn't really a question of is this right or is this wrong? Because it's there are so many ways you can do it. What matters is, does that make sense to you? If it makes sense to you, then it's right. It's right for your second brain. And basically, as soon as you hear that, you know it's nonsense. Like it's not real. Like it's not a real thing.
It's marketing.
What will give you the second brain is your first brain working in a way that is consistent, so that there is predictability. And now everything you make a record of will become a second brain, because now it's consistent and frictionless. You know, I want it to happen quickly. Why do you want frictionless? If you live in a frictionless world, you cannot walk.
Like on ice.
What you
right?
want is friction. Exactly. What you want is friction in your life. Why? Because it slows you down. When you slow things down, you actually think. You don't just capture mindlessly. There is also no right or wrong when it comes to these sorts of things, because they are always custom. Whether we are talking about NeoVim plus Kitty, whether we are talking about Emacs, whether we are talking about Emacs and all the possible ways you can do things, there isn't really a question of is this right or is this wrong? Because it's there are so many ways you can do it. What matters is, does that make sense to you? If it makes sense to you, then it's right. It's right for you. And the reason I'm saying this is because many times people will try to implement a tool that doesn't make sense to them. Like, let's say the getting things done methodology. Like, it's a good methodology if you think that way. But if you don't think that way, it makes no sense. You will never be able to apply it. Yep. So it's not that the methodology is wrong.
Okay.
So daily notes, correct. So for me, daily notes are not really knowledge. For example, and what I mean by that, like 5 years from now, it will be irrelevant if this morning I water the plants or not, let's say. So that is a factoid that happened this morning, but it doesn't empower my future self to do something useful with that information. Whereas if I say, for example, this is how you encrypt files using GPG, whatever, right? Assuming the road there is detailed and to the point, even 5 years from now, that thing has value. Maybe it's not 100% up to date, you know, but basically from there, I can go somewhere with that. So for me, this type of note is the one I am interested in. And the others, I don't really care. And the reason I don't want to have them is because they add noise. Like, always the question with any kind of workflow, whether it's Zettelkasten or whatever you were doing with Obsidian, whatever that is called, like, it doesn't really matter. What matters is retrievability. Like, okay, I have captured all that knowledge. Can I retrieve it? Can I surface what I am searching for? And if the answer is yes, then a secondary question is, does what I have discovered have some structure which makes sense? Or is it just like a collection of thoughts that I still need to assemble in some way? And how much work does that require? For example, I haven't seen what you showed me there with that large file. But if that large file was, well, everything related to Kubernetes, to me, that would still not be helpful, because I would still have to kind of piece together a certain structure. Like, it would still have to have some coherent message to deliver. So Kubernetes as a whole, for me, isn't really useful, because what would be more useful is like, well, how do I spin up, I don't know what they even use, like, you know, a server or whatever they call it, you know, a container, whatever they do. But basically, it would be some action within the world of Kubernetes. And I would be like, okay, how do I perform that action within that world? And for me, that is what I would be interested to be surfaced, rather than the whole world as a whole. Because the whole world as a whole, cannot fit in my head, basically. Like, I cannot I don't know what to do with that.
You have a point there. So, yeah, I've thought to myself, like, okay, how do I make this? Because I know that in the future I'm not gonna remember anything, and that's what taking notes. It's a secondary effect of taking notes. It makes you lazy, right? Because okay, I have a notes. I'm not even going to try to remember. So I know that I will not remember. But when I'm writing the note, I have to think, okay, how am I going to help future me to make sense out of this information? Because I will not understand it. I will not understand my notes. So, oh, that's the tough. Do you create master files for your information then, like Kubernetes, or let's say Emacs, and you have your notes inside that file, or how do you do it?
Me personally, I don't do that. I will take notes, and generally this goes to also answer your question of how do I help my future self. I will take notes that are action or topic specific. Like, for example, let's say Emacs, okay? How do I switch to a project in Emacs? Like, that's a very specific question. Like it's a Googleable question, right?
Yep.
And I will have a note which says, okay, this is how you do it. A project is this, by the way. And here are some interesting key bindings. And this is the relevant behavior, right? So that kind of answers the question. And that file will have a tag Emacs. So the master file, so-called, is basically a query for all the files whose tag is Emacs.
Okay.
So there isn't a master file per se. There is a collection of files which together form this corpus of knowledge. And each of those files answers a specific question or is focused on a given task.
Okay. So you have them in questions then, right? Like, and where do you store those questions? I got lost a little bit because I lost power and I got scared, but it already came back. Okay.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, good.
So in a master file, you have questions and all of them go into that file. Is that right?
No. So I don't think in terms of basically anything such as a master file. So what I think of is in terms of individual items of knowledge. For example, the other day, I was like, hey, how do I make my browser not change my microphone's volume? Right? Like that's a real thing. I had it the other day. So basically, I had to do some research or whatever. Eventually, you have to paste something into the browser and you toggle a switch or whatever. So basically, I wrote exactly all the steps I followed. I'm like, okay, here was my problem. I would set it to, let's say, 100. By the time I would join the call, it was like 30%. I'm like, what is happening?
I encountered that issue, but it's a flag that you have to change in the browser, right?
Yes. At least that's what I did. I don't know if there are other ways.
Yeah.
And anyway, I record the steps one by one. And then I go to the, paste this in the URL bar. Then it will show you this. It reads that. Here is the message it says. And then, okay, so basically that was my note. And the title of the note is how to change or how to prevent the browser from changing your microphone's volume. It was something like that.
And where do you put that thought? Do you put it on that day's note, or do you put it on a file that has like a mixture of notes, or where does it go?
So it's a standalone file in my case. It's a standalone file. The day and hour specific time I wrote it will be recorded, but that's like a detail that doesn't really matter. What matters is that it's a standalone file that I have created. The name of the file contains basically all the query terms, like, browser, microphone, volume. And it will also have some extra tags, such as Linux or whatever.
Okay.
And there will be all these files in a directory. And then when I need to search for something, I will either search through file names or through file contents, basically a GNU find or a GNU grep. And eventually I will find what I'm looking for. The reason I don't do it on a day basis is because the day as a data point is not inherent to the knowledge. It is tangential, but like knowing how to change the I keep saying Microsoft, the microphone volume is not relevant whether it's Monday or Sunday or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like on Monday, it's still the same flag as it is on Sunday. So for me, the date then is not important. And if I tie this knowledge to a date, I now create an association that is not intuitive, where it's like I have to remember what day it was when I encountered that issue in order to remember the words I used to describe that issue.
Okay. And what if you update that? What if that changes? What if the method of changing the volume or whatever changes? What do? You update the same notes? Do you create a new one?
So I will update the same note, but usually what I will do is I will keep the old text as is, and I will say, okay, update the old text is below. This is what I have done many times. And the reason I keep the old text is because maybe it's still useful in some other context, or maybe it's relevant because, I don't know, on my laptop it's still used or whatever. So I will keep it around for longer.
Okay.
And maybe I'm also referencing it in another node. So I need to be able, like if I am following links, to be able to still find it.
Way of taking notes that works for me. I haven't found that yet, and I think this is not a bad example, because I tried Zettelkasten and I was like, but I don't get it. But this seems useful. Like, I have the way that I told you, right? My method in NeoVim, which is not perfect, and yeah, retrievability. That's a good point, because sometimes I'm like, okay, what was the name of the heading? What text did I use? How can I find the heading? So it's becomes quite difficult to find information.
Naturally. Yes, naturally. And that's why, at least for me, what I ended up discovering as a solution is to be a little bit robotic and verbose. So, for example, that thing with the microphone volume, I don't just say, microphone fix.
Yeah,
Like,
that's not
that's
searchable.
not useful. I will never find it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, use as many words as you can. Like, it's a little bit like search engine optimization. You have to use all the words that people would use to search for the thing, to find you online, basically. So it's a little bit basically the same idea. And I'm like, okay, use as many words as possible, but try to be robotic. Try to, this is not literature. You just want to have as many keywords there as possible. And in plain terms, like, don't try to be smart about it, and don't try to assume context. Assume that basically your future self will know what this was about.
Yeah, you will not.
And that's why when I write the note, it's like, this is what I was trying. This is was the problem. This is what I did. This is what came up. This is how I followed up. Like, basically explain as if I am talking to somebody who is a complete...
Organize my stuff. What do you think?
A general point here is that there is no right tool, and there is no basically one method that I can give you, like, okay, use the node and it will fix your life. Like, there is this idea that people say, oh, here is the package that gives you the second brain. And basically, as soon as you hear that, it's nonsense. Like, it's not real. Like, it's not a real thing.
It's marketing.
What will give you the second brain is your first brain working in a way that is consistent, so that there is predictability. And now everything you make a record of will become a second brain, because now it's consistent and you can find stuff. So retrievability, right? So what really matters is to have simplicity, I think. When you are not sure what to do, you want the simple, the better. Or let me phrase it a little bit differently. Complexity is a matter of refinement, not of intelligence. It's a matter of refinement. Like, things become more complex as you refine your method, right? So somebody who knows a lot of what they are doing, they will have like all sorts of specificities. But if you have like a complex method out of the box, thinking that, oh, I am very smart, I can deal with complexity. No, you cannot. Because you don't have the sophistication. It's not a matter of intelligence. It's a matter of how long have you been doing this consistently to reach the point of distilling it to this and that and the other pattern of interaction. So in other words, keeping it simple, The simple, the better. And not thinking too much about, oh, how are all the possible ways that I can benefit from this? Like, think of it like, imagine you are on a standard Unix TTY, right? You don't have NeoVim, you don't have Kitty, you don't have Emacs, you don't have any of those nice tools. All you have is grep, find, ls, this sort of thing. How do you find your stuff? Basically, once you frame it this way, you know what is the baseline of tools available to you, and now you start writing with that in mind.
Mhm.
So you will write things in a way that make it easier for you to find stuff. For example, to be concrete, like if I rely on a large org file, like this is what people do. For example, like I have one massive org file, a master file, right?
Yep.
For my tasks.org.
Mhm.
Me personally, I have that. Because my tasks.org always goes through org agenda, that's fine. I can rely on Emacs and I can rely on org. But if I have the equivalent of a tasks.org for my knowledge, that's a disaster waiting to happen. Because if I want to query that file using grep and ls and whatever, I will never find anything. I cannot rely on searching through headings. I cannot rely on understanding org links or the org IDs or whatever. Like it becomes much more involved. I cannot rely on Emacs, for example, right? So that's why I wouldn't do massive org file for my knowledge. It would be smaller file. It's exactly that idea. It's like, okay, imagine you are on a TTY. Imagine you are not on your computer. What do you do?
Oh yeah. If I'm on plain Vim, I'm kind of lost there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, oh, I was gonna ask you something, but I forgot. I had it. I lost it.
Mm-hmm. But let me continue concretely now. Beside tooling, so of course the tooling has to be simple.
Oh,
It has to work on a standard Unix.
so you
Sorry,
have
yeah.
to reach the limitations. Let's say that I start using something with the base tools, and I'm like, okay, I have reached the limitation. It's time for another tool, like the notes, right? That's the moment when you decide, okay, I have to try something else because
Mm-hmm.
the basic, like the
Mm-hmm.
raw tools, the default tools, do not serve the purpose anymore, right?
Mm-hmm. So, for example, here, like what the note actually does, it doesn't add an extra tool. It simply adds a streamlining of existing tools. Like it basically creates file names. Fundamentally, the note is a file naming tool. So it creates file names, and those file names, I could be writing them by hand. Like on a standard TTY, I could still write a denote file name, but I just have denote to write the file name faster. Fundamentally, that's what it is. So really, there isn't like an extra tooling requirement. Whereas, for example, what you are seeing here on my screen, the org agenda, that's an extra tool. Like if I need to, like if you check what the org agenda is doing, like it has to open an org file, it has to parse it, it has to understand the properties drawers. It has to interpret the timestamps. Like it has to do a ton of stuff, which of course it's very useful. I use it. But if you are on a generic computer, you don't have any of that functionality.
Mm-hmm.
You see what I'm saying? So you have to think in terms of that. Like keep your knowledge as simple as possible in terms of the tooling. That's the one thing. And then the second thing is make it as clear as it can get, as context free or situationality free as it can get. For example, now we are meeting, and let's say you learned something, right? You want to write down everything that you are thinking. You don't want to say, like, Prot told me about simple notes, and you leave it there, right? Because Prot told me about simple notes is useful right now because you have all the context in your head of what we have covered.
Yep.
But 6 months from now, 6 years from now, that statement is completely meaningless because the context has evaporated. It's not there.
Uh-huh.
Whereas you want to say, you know what? Today I talked with Prot. We discussed how we can approach this problem. What is the problem? Right? You explain what the problem is. Then we will rely on standard Unix tools, blah, blah, blah. And you explain it that way. And so that thing will always be useful. And because it's verbose, it will also be easier for you to find things because now there are many ways you can search for it and eventually you will get them.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. Okay.
And there is another advantage of this approach of being verbose. It actually adds sand to the gears, sand to the wheels. Like what a lot of programmers are talking about is I want it to be frictionless. I want it to happen quickly. Why do you want frictionless? If you live in a frictionless world, you cannot walk.
Like on ice.
What you
right?
want is friction.
Uh-huh.
Exactly. What you want is friction in your life. Why? Because it slows you down. When you slow things down, you actually think. You don't just capture mindlessly. You actually think what you want to capture. You have to put in the work to capture it. So because you have to put in the work so that it is, comprehensive, you won't be capturing a lot of useless stuff.
Mhm.
You will eventually be picking the stuff that you actually care about. I think what we covered here already is good because it's mostly conceptual. And I think the concepts are more valuable than the implementation details. Like many times, this happens, for example, like we had this conversation in the first meeting where you asked me, well, how can I switch between two tabs quickly, flip between them?
Mhm.
And of course, in Emacs, like there are a million ways to do this, like already. But I answered you one thing specifically, and I told you, like, you can even write some code yourself. And for me, the intent wasn't to tell you all the options. For me, the intent was to bring to your attention the fact that when you think of something in Emacs, it's standard procedure to actually write code about it, because that's the whole point. So for me here, the intention was to bring to your awareness not the implementation details of there is this function and that function, rather the general idea of, well, when something doesn't exist, you can always implement it with like 3 lines of code or something by just wrapping it around existing commands. And that would be my point again and now, which is like one possible pitfall or mistake with Emacs or with any other such complicated tool is that we focus too much on the specific details and then we lose sight of the bigger picture. And the bigger picture here is that whatever the basic tools are, you can always do things on top because it's programmable, it's extensible. And this extensibility isn't that difficult, actually. It's relatively easy. And once you get into the habit of doing that, basically, you no longer think in terms of, well, is there a package for that? Like the answer is, basically, you can always do it. Like you will always be able to do it, even if there is no package or if there is a basic package or with the help of AI or whatever. But basically, the answer is, if you can formulate it as a clear thought, basically you can probably do it.
Mm-hmm. Yep, right. Makes sense.
And this also goes to things such as org capture, which was one of your topics, right? So org capture is a powerful, extremely useful tool. But if you want something really basic, you don't have to use org capture. You can use like a function, which is like 3 lines of code. So you go find the task and you do mx org deadline.
Inside that heading, right? Because this is a level 1 heading.
Inside that heading.
Okay.
Yes, the fact that it is level 1 is a detail. It doesn't really matter. It could be level 5. It would still be the same thing. For as long as you are on the heading or on the text below it, like screws and the hammer and whatever, right?
Mhm.
So for as long as you are somewhere here, if I do org deadline, I get this date picker, and I can pick a date or I can type the date. But let's say it's tomorrow morning, right? That I have to do that. Okay. So there is my deadline. So, and actually, let's have these meetings also with, let's say, I will mark them as scheduled. So after that deadline, I have the meeting with Prot. And then later still, I have the meeting with Protesilaos. So now I will do the time sensitive one. Okay. So I will do that. And I see how my next day will look. Actually, we are already on the next day. So, but how my day will look, you see? So here I am now. And I see, okay, coming up, my day will look like this. Granted, sorry, just to say, we are 0, 0, and then it goes to 6. Normally, my days start from 6 a.m. So
Oh, that's why.
I
Okay.
would never, I didn't configure it to have, like the early morning hours. But anyway, like, okay, I have to do this, and then I have these other tasks coming up, right? But look at this. Look actually at this. Already it's starting to look busy. We wrote this earlier, right?
Yep.
Like, I'm like, you know what? Let me just make sense. Like, again, filter. Let me see, what are my meetings tomorrow? Okay. Now this is manageable. Like, I
Oh,
don't panic, right?
okay.
I'm like, okay, this is manageable. I know these are my meetings. Okay, now these are my meetings. Let me see. Okay, what does work want from me? Okay, this is what they want from me. Right.
Oh, so you can filter based on tags on the calendar itself, right? Or agenda,
Yes,
or in the
basically
agenda.
in every agenda view. So these are called agenda views. And then it's just different views into your org tasks,
Okay, and you can define a
whether those are
default.
time sensitive or not.
You can define the default
You
tag.
you can define basically, sorry, default tag, you mean like a file? Like, I'm not sure what you
When
mean.
you bring
Like
up
a
the
generic
agenda,
tag?
you want to see only meetings by
Like
default.
a default view.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, of course. Of course you can do that. You can actually define a completely custom agenda. Let me show you here. For example, here I have a daily agenda and top priorities. So this is like my custom agenda where it has different sections. Now, of course, it's not filled up with sections, but basically here would appear the tasks that are important. Actually, let me do it. Let me do it just so you understand this point. So let's say that, for example, now I am adding a priority. So do the gutters. Okay, so I have to do the gutters, and maybe I can have another one. And do the floor.
So A is like the
Okay.
highest priority for you, right?
Yes, and this is arbitrary, right? Like, I defined it like this. It's my custom agenda. Basically, I set the rules, whatever I want.
Okay.
So there is something like that. Now, let's imagine I also had to pay the bills. So, and of course, paying bills, you never do actually that. So I had to do it and I didn't do it, right? So it's in the past. So, so we have that. And then we have like a future meeting. So let's actually add this future meeting. It's okay here. It doesn't really matter. And let's have like another future meeting. Okay. And let's say this one is maybe here. Okay. Like this. Okay. Let's go into that custom agenda now. Oh, sorry. I want to go here, my custom agenda. So important tasks without a date. For me, these are tasks that are not time sensitive in the strict sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I could do them this morning, I could do them tomorrow, I can do them next week, but I shouldn't delay them too much, right? Like, do the floor. Well, I won't do it in 3 years. Like, it has to be done, in the near future,
Mm-hmm.
right? That sort of thing. Then, if I scheduled something and I didn't do it, because of course I always schedule things that are actually time sensitive, they are not aspirational tasks, remember?
Mm.
Why is it there? Why didn't I do it?
Mm-hmm.
So it has to be the first thing on the agenda, basically, before I even get to today's thing. Like, remember, like, you had this, you didn't do it, like something is wrong.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Right? So I have to basically see that. And then I will get to my daily agenda, plus all the filtering we said. And then I will be like, okay, what are the next 3 days like? Okay, I have no meetings. And then further into the future, okay, so basically I know how my immediate future looks like.
Okay. And this is basically org agenda's defaults, right? Like,
this is org agenda, but not defaults. This is like custom stuff. But imagine all these agenda views, literally all of them. Imagine you put them in a single buffer, like a view like this, and below it, the daily view.
okay.
Like, basically all those views, you can put them in a single buffer, and for each of those, you can add your own parameters. For example,
Okay.
exactly this, you can have it there. You can have another below which shows you every task with priority A. Another below which shows you every task with plus 3 days from today deadline or whatever. Like, basically, you have full control over all sorts of parameters. So basically, if you have like work to do and you want to access it quickly, you can do it this way.
Okay, awesome. One last question before we drop. How do you set up recurring tasks? Let's say that I have a meeting with Rumen every Friday at X time. How do you do it? That's simple, I guess, right?
It is simple, but there is an important difference. So I want you to see this recurring, repeated tasks. So there is a difference in how you repeat tasks, and it's explained here in more detail in the manual. But basically, the idea is this: like, for example, in the case of paying a rent, it's a monthly task, right? But if you haven't paid one rent, like you still have to pay it, right? So, whereas if you haven't met with Rumen, let's say, you won't meet for 2 days in a row or whatever. Like, you just say, okay, we missed it, no big deal, right? So, when you are repeating a task, you want to know this difference so that you can use the correct notation. So, for example, here, this means I want you to repeat plus 1 month from now, but also to keep a record of basically every month, right? So when I mark it as done, I know that it's still there. But there is another one, which is like this sort of thing and this sort of thing. So I don't want to bother you with the technicalities, but basically, this is the sort of case where you need to read the manual.
okay.
It will help you.
Okay.
But it's like an extra character, basically, that will slightly change the meaning.
Okay.
This is usually, just to say this final thing, this is usually how you do it. And you do it this way when you care about the to do or the done state. So you have a task and you want to know, well, did I actually do this task? Yes or no? Okay. But there are so called events where things are happening, but you don't really need to know, like, did I do it or didn't I do it? For example, let's say every weekday, so Monday through Friday at 5 p.m., the telenovela is playing, right? Like, it's not a task. Maybe if I am available, I will watch it, but it's not a to do, right? So for those, you don't really want to have like a to do and a deadline and all that. Okay, so keep that in mind. So those will be separate from your tasks where tracking the state of the task matters. So to do and done kind of thing.
Okay. What if I have a weekly meeting with Roman and we decide to change it a day after? Let's say that specific instance, the rest of them don't change, right? So I guess you can change that instance only without affecting the future ones.
I'm not sure if you can do it with this mechanism. I believe you will have to create a separate task. But I'm not sure like you can like a one-off exception and otherwise keep the repeater going.
Okay. So you keep the repeater going and then just add another task. If you want to simplify your life, just add another one for the correct date and move on, right? You can mark the future one for that week as done.
As cancelled.
As cancelled.
Or as cancelled.
And it'll cancel
That's
just
how
that
I would
one.
do it.
That okay.
That week's, yes. Because it's a repeater, marking it as cancel will create a log entry and it will tell you, well, actually I can show you. But basically, let's take this. Where is it? So is it no, I wasn't here. I was in the demo. So they use this notation. Of course, we want to take only this part. So you say meeting with Rumen, okay? Okay, so we are meeting, let's say we are meeting, okay. We are meeting, oh, sorry, I forgot let's put it here like this. And then we have this. And I will do 1 week. So let's go and look at the agenda. So, okay, here. Let's go now here. Let's say that for this week it is cancelled. Okay. Had other stuff to do. I write an explanation of what happened. Look what happened now. I still see a to do, right? But if you notice the date, it's not for tomorrow, which is, or rather today, which is the 2nd of August. It's for the week after, Sunday, the next Sunday, you see? So it internally, look, the 2 of August event was cancelled. This is the explanation.
Okay.
The 9 of August event is still on the agenda, right? So that's what I was telling you. So if you have canceled it and now you say, okay, to do meet with Rumen. So for this specific week, we want to meet on a Monday or whatever, Tuesday, right? And that's how you would do it.
Okay, makes sense. That's useful. Okay. Now, what I have to think about is, okay, there are some weeks in which I meet with Rumen. Other weeks, the next week I meet with Rumen and Ted. I don't know how to do that with a recurrent meeting. But I need to set up multiple recurrent meetings. I have to think about it.
So, like for example, let's say you meet with Rumen every week, and every other week Ted also
Ted and
joins,
Rumen.
or is it a
Exactly.
separate?
Yeah, no. Ted and Rumen every other week.
What you can do instead is you can reason about it as two tasks. So you have a meet with Rumen, just Rumen, which happens every 2 weeks, right? So it happens every 2 weeks. And then you have a meeting which is
meet with Rumen and
with
Ted.
Rumen, exactly, which happens on the other weeks. So for example, here, right? So does that make sense?
Yep. Yep.
Right?
Yeah, so I won't
you
have
could approach it this way.
meetings 1 week, right? I'll just see one. Okay, that makes sense.
Because they never coincide. So they will go like 1 and 3, 2 and 4 kind of thing.
And what about the guy that I meet with once a month? He's going to coincide with Rumen and Ted. So
he will be on those as well.
He will be in one of those with Rumen and Ted, but that's just going to be one in the month.
Okay. Of course, you could still have it like, in that case, you only meet with Rumen and Ted once, and then there is a
with
good
Rumen,
point.
Ted, and the other guy.
Yeah. Well, you could still have it marked. Look, we are overthinking it because you could still have it. And even if they coincide, meet with those three, right? Even if they coincide, what happens is you will still see it on exactly the same hour on the specific day. So, like realistically, so do we see it? Actually, where did I put them? Sorry. 2, is that correct? Yes, I did right. Where is it? Am I not? Oh, here they are. Yeah, of course. So they coincide, right? So technically, this is not 100% correct, but in practice, it's obvious what they are about. So yeah, I don't know how much of a problem this is.
It's just an extra line that is gonna show up there, and I don't complicate. Even your dog's already left.
But we will go. We will go for the hike again. Like after look, dogs are amazing, but one thing like they do very well is like they pick up cues. So as soon as I say the word which we say at the end, I won't say it now. They are like, okay, they start stretching and they're like, okay, great.
So
and we will go for a walk.